My name is Seth Feeman. I serve as Executive Director and CEO here at the Frist Art Museum. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for braving the rain, the weird rain that just happened. Thank you for braving parking, which I hear is full. Thank you for queuing up. I'm so thrilled that you all are here. As is our custom at the Frist, I'd like to first offer a land acknowledgement. The Frist Art Museum sits on land the Cherokee and Shawnee Native peoples, elders, and their ancestors call their homeland. We acknowledge and pay respect to them and offer deep gratitude and respect to the land and water that support us. Today, we are very excited to celebrate the opening of the exhibition Fabric of a Nation, American Quilt Stories from the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Featuring nearly 50 exceptional quilts and coverlets drawn from the MFA's premier textile collection, the exhibition demonstrates how this art form has evolved over more than 300 years in the American colonies and United States and continues to develop today. After opening at the MFA in October 2021, the show traveled to Los Angeles and Jacksonville, Florida, and now we are very happy to have it here on view until October 12th in our upstairs galleries. We are thrilled to welcome exhibition curator Jennifer Swope, the David and Roberta Logie Curator of Textiles at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, for tonight's conversation with Frist Senior Curator Katie Delmez. Yeah. Jennifer attended the Winterthur program in American culture as a Lois F. McNeil Fellow, receiving a master's degree in American material culture from the University of Delaware. She's the co-author and curator of Quilts in Color, the Pilgrim Roy Collection, a catalog and exhibition that opened at the MFA in 2014. And she most recently co-authored the publication for this exhibition, Fabric of a Nation, American Quilt Stories, which I will say again and again is available in our gift shop, which you should definitely go check out. I will welcome Jennifer and Katie in a moment to begin their remarks, but I'd like to acknowledge a few of our special guests who are with us tonight. From the MFA Boston, we welcome Project Manager for Traveling Exhibitions, Mallory McCoy. Mallory, thank you for joining us. Thank you for wearing a quilt dress to join us tonight. I also want to acknowledge and thank Mary Kay Volvogel for being here with us, an eminent scholar of quilting who's been a pleasure to be with. I know our team has enjoyed learning from her today. I also wanted to acknowledge the expert help of two of the MFA Boston team members who have been with us for the installation, Collections Care Specialist Allison Murphy and Head of Textile Conservation Meredith Montague. I said this morning at the press preview that we gave, but you will see when you go into the exhibition yourself, if you haven't already, the objects that are on view are extremely delicate things. Many of them have been very well loved. Some of them well loved more than 300 years ago. They are fragile, they are sensitive to light, they are both heavy and wrinkleable, and it takes a lot to get these things looking fresh and keeping them safe and secure, and the MFA team has been extraordinary. It allows us to share the stories that you'll hear more about tonight, but they're also ensuring that we'll be able to do that for generations to come, so we're really grateful to them. We're also excited to introduce the latest in our ongoing Art in the Atrium installation series. This exhibition is in conversation with Fabric of a Nation, and they are textile works by Ashley Larkin and Shabazz Larkin. I think Ashley and Shabazz are both here with us tonight. Thank you for sharing your work, and I hope when you go upstairs to see the show, you will enjoy both of those shows in conversation. Thanks also to our supporters. Our presentation of Fabric of a Nation is supported in part by the Sandra Shatton Foundation, and we are grateful for continuing operating support from the Frist Foundation, the Tennessee Arts Commission, Metro Arts, and the National Endowment for the Arts. I also want to express my sincere gratitude to our members, which include many of the people who are here in the room. I see many of you with your member tote bag, which I'm thrilled to see. You can put a lot of stuff in there. And carry it everywhere so people know where you're celebrating. We really couldn't do this without you, so thank you all for being a part of this. Now, please join me in welcoming Jen and Katie.
All right. Well, wow, what a wonderful crowd tonight. Thank you so much for being here, for braving this crazy weather and the parking to join us for what I know is going to be an amazing conversation. Just very briefly, as Seth noted, Fabric of a Nation includes 45 quilts and coverlets from the very esteemed textile collection of the MFA. What I'm really struck by is that in addition to just the incredible technical skills that we see reflected in the objects, the exhibition is also really remarkable because it tells such a range of stories about the makers of the objects, who were often women, those who cared for the objects, also often women, and the times in which they were produced, including sometimes when many economic systems were dependent on materials, raw goods that were produced by enslaved people. And so this exhibition really does offer an opportunity to tell a more complete and inclusive narrative of 3 centuries of American history, stories of achievement and progress, but also injustices and displacement. The wonderful quote that Jen started the exhibition with in Boston, and that we have also in the exhibition, Dr. Carolyn Mazlumi states that because of the familiarity and the comforting nature of quilts, they can be a soft landing of sorts for talking about hard topics. So I think that's a really important through line of the exhibition. Jen, thank you for lending your treasures. Thank you for being here with us tonight and for sharing their stories. I'm wondering if maybe you could just share, if we could begin with you sharing a little bit about the origin story for the exhibition. How did it come about, and when was it on view in Boston?
Well, we actually started with many of the works that, many of the works that you'll see in the last gallery called Making a Difference were, several of them were really the catalyst for this whole publication, which it was initially, and eventually this wonderful exhibition. I fell in love with quilts of the 70s and 80s because the stories of the makers and artists who found their way to quilting was so fascinating to me. And as you'll see in the last gallery, the works are all completely individual and different. And I'd always loved 18th and 19th century quilts, but seeing how these often young men and young women were coping with a time that's very like today of great change and conflict, and how they found their way to this art form that was both so expressive and they really met their moment like through this art form. So that's really how it started, and I was told that that's too narrow. And then I was reminded that we have a really, really good collection at the MFA of late 17th all the way through the early 18th century, 19th century quilts. So then it became this idea of a conversation across time. And we were very fortunate to actually think of it as a book first. So it started as a publication. And so if you have the publication, you'll see that the publication is actually arranged absolutely chronologically. And I love being here in the Frist Art Museum that was a post office with and staying in what was a train station, because Pam Parmel, who was is the co-author of the publication and was the chair of our department, she's the one who came up with the subtitles of ships, canals, trains, automobiles, and rocket ships. And so I feel like
the sections in the catalog.
Yeah, and so I feel like this idea has come full circle being here today. And so that's really how it all started very soon after we started working with people in the community, both within the MFA and also in the Boston area who were artists, quilt historians, quilt collectors, textile artists, really pretty much anybody who would be willing to come look at a quilt and have a sandwich. We really were able to think about ways of interpreting these beautiful works of art in new ways, and I think you'll find that both in the exhibition and the publication, having living artists speak to their own attraction, their own reasons for wanting to express themselves in this art form is actually historical in many ways. They do look back and were inspired by quilts, even if it wasn't something they did in their family, or they really were very new to the tradition.
I am not a quilt specialist, and as I've come to know the show, I've really been inspired by how so many of the more recent quilt makers, the contemporary quilt makers, are certainly looking to the past, but also making it their own too, and that seems to be a really interesting kind of dynamic there. So this is an installation shot from when the show was in Boston. It's traveled to LA, Jacksonville, Florida. We are the final venue, so encourage your friends in the region to come see the exhibition, and there are a few quilts in our presentation that haven't been seen before, so that makes it even more special. Well, given that the 4th of July is just next week, I don't know how that's possible. It seems very timely that the exhibition opens with these two quilts. Actually, there's a third, but it's not on screen now, that really do reference visually the American flag with the red, white, and blue color palette and with the stars and the stripes. Could you maybe introduce us to the makers of these works and the stories that they are expressing?
Yes, well, the quilt on the left, I made up the name Hoosier Quilt for that, because it just, when we had a wonderful, part of the process of getting ready for the publication was doing some deep research into each quilt. So we had a wonderful summer intern named Kira Buzzle, who was at Bryn Mawr at the time. She's since graduated. And
shout out to amazing interns and fellows.
Yes, who are all
they
here.
They are amazing, yes.
They really do keep the field going.
Yes.
And she dove right in. So there are over 300 names stitched into this quilt. So it was a fundraising quilt. So each of those names represents a small contribution that would have been made to the effort to promote the ratification of the 19th Amendment. Indiana was one of the later states to ratify. So I'll give it away. They did ratify the 19th Amendment. It worked. The quilt worked, obviously, and so each name represents a small donation, maybe a dime, maybe a nickel, and then a quilt like this, a fundraising quilt, would have then been auctioned off in an event, a public event, to again raise the profile or raise awareness for this cause. And so Kira Buzzle got down deep and actually found birth dates and identities for almost half, 164. And this quilt had always been thought to be earlier because Susan B. Anthony's name is stitched into it, but there were some children who were born after the death of Susan B. Anthony, which she died in 1906. So we realized quickly, and most were from Indiana, and from rural Indiana, the north west corner of Indiana, a few from Chicago. And so we had to completely flipped the story. And so because story was so important and so central to the whole project, that's why having the publication go first, so you never really can get a story right forever. There will always be opportunities to come back and re-examine and research and continue the story, but we wanted to honor the history of these objects to the extent that we were able to. So that's just an example of how we took that part of the project very seriously, and I think it really enriches the experience of the viewer. The Irene Williams quilt,
which we'll move to now.
This was made much later in 1975, again, back to the 70s. And she was a quilter, she's since passed away, who lived in Gee's Bend, Alabama, in Wilcox County. And she made this 10 years after Dr. Martin Luther King came visited Gee's Bend and gave a very inspirational and important speech in the Baptist church in that community. We don't know if Irene Williams joined the march from Selma to Birmingham, but there were several quilters and residents of Gee's Bend who did. So we thought that, like, just thinking about today, this moment that we're in now, that she made this quilt 10 years after that event showed to me and all of us how important that basic civil right of being able to vote, the basic human right of being able to participate in one's government, how important that is.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable. 2 different women, 2 different times, 2 different periods, but still advocating for access to voting for marginalized communities. This kind of seems like a good moment to ask the big question we've talked about a little bit over the last 24 hours or so, and that is, why do we think of quilts as being kind of a democratic art form? Is it because you're not taught in a formal academy? Is it because many of us live with them? What do you think makes quilts so democratic?
I think that's such a good question, and I think it really is sort of all of those things. We did not invent that phrase. It's something that has bubbled up, and it always seems worth repeating over sort of, I think it was probably first published around 1975 in the 70s, in a period of also great change and political activism. And I think democratic works in the sense that we are a democracy. So I think because quilts are so associated with the United States and colonial America, even though they are a global art form, which you'll see, of course, when you visit the exhibition, as you say, the access to the art form, that it does make it, in a sense, a democratic art form. It became more accessible and perhaps more democratic as the 19th century proceeded, because the materials that were available to people became less expensive and more plentiful. And I thought today's talk was very interesting. What Shabazz Larkin said about the exhibition talks about the scarcity of materials over time decreasing, and that that they have to then flip that idea, because now cloth is so abundant that it isn't valued as a material. So how do we put value back into that? And again, it's like the scarcity heightened the storytelling of the older quilts, and now the availability and the abundance of cloth actually maybe can help also the storytelling, be an agent of the storytelling.
Yeah. Jen is referring to the fact that Shabazz Larkin and Ashley Larkin, they made 2 quilts, actually 3, we only have 2 on view, from objects from cloth that they got from turnip green. So just this whole idea of upcycling, that now that we have plenty. Yeah.
Again, it's like it's a democratic art. It's like,
yes.
What can we make together? What can we make in community? And I think that's really where that phrase really captures that idea.
Yeah, that makes good sense. So after that introduction, we move into the section Unseen Hands, which I have found to be so illuminating, and I hadn't really thought about, that there are so many people involved in the production of a quilt, from the materials to the actual stitching. And this is also where I think, again, I was so educated by thinking about the global trade that was happening with a lot of the raw goods. Could you maybe use this beautiful piece to kind of talk about that process and what hands would have been involved in the production from the beginning to the end of it?
Yes, I think that's always such a good way to start to understand just what a quilt is. And so essentially to define a quilt, although there are objects in the exhibition that are technically not quilts, but we're using quilt in a broad way. But To look at this whole cloth quilt, it has a front that you can see in the image. It's made of lengths of cloth that were sewn together. You can't necessarily see those seams. You do see some of the vertical lines, and that's from when the cloth was actually folded and calendared. So it's a woven wool cloth made in most likely England, certainly Great Britain, dyed that deep, deep indigo from indigo that was most likely produced in South Carolina or the Caribbean. And then once the cloth is fulled and processed, it's calendared, so it's put under heat and pressure. So if anyone's ever had an iron on too high and you iron something that's wool and it gets shiny, that's basically what they did here. And why would they do such a thing? Well, because it looks a lot like silk. So even though this wool was actually highly processed and very refined and very expensive for the family in Western Massachusetts or Connecticut that received it and made this quilt, it was still kind of aspirant. Like they sort of like got as close to silk as they could get. And then because cloth was so valuable, you can imagine it had to come by ship from England to Boston and then make the long trip across Massachusetts, the colony of Massachusetts, possibly down the Connecticut River into Connecticut. So they didn't make patchwork. Most of these 18th century quilts and 17th century quilts are whole cloth quilts, because actually having a whole piece of cloth was a sign of status. And having several whole pieces of cloth that came from very far away, that were dyed in a very deep color, was an extra sign of status. What's inside the quilt, the stuffing or the filling, was probably just sort of not as great a quality of wool that was actually produced from sheep probably owned by the quilt maker. And then the back, which you can't see, is homespun wool dyed a sort of greeny brown that is probably from like either walnut or some natural dye stuff that would have either been produced on the plantation that this was used on or even traded for.
Amazing. Well, you set right up for these two works that are quite different than the whole cloth quilts, and you've talked about how by the mid-19th century, the Industrial Revolution was well underway, and there were a lot of new changes to the technology of how the fabric was being produced, and even how people were making quilts. Could you speak to those elements of these two?
Of course. Well, you'll see, I'm going to get my lefts and rights. So on the right is, it's just one of the most beautiful pieced quilts that I've ever seen. It looks like it just came off the frame. It's a pieced pattern called Carolina Lily, and around the mid-19th century, a lot of these pieced patterns start to have names, almost like folk songs, and so that becomes part of the tradition of American quilting. Essentially, there certainly were pieced quilts that were British and European, but mostly British. But they really become what we think of as an American art form. The pieced quilt pattern is really explored in an American context. And cloth is still incredibly valuable, but it becomes printed cotton cloth because of mills in Manchester in England, which were supplied by raw cotton from the American South in this period. That cotton cloth became just a little bit more accessible and a little more affordable. So women, usually at home, could express themselves and make these beautiful blocks that were repeated and these wonderful geometric designs. And often you'll see in this 1830s, 1840s period, even into the 1850s, they would have used a furnishing print, so this floral print that is around the three edges. When you go into the gallery, look carefully at it, you can see that it's a chintz that still has its glaze. It is like this has just hardly been handled. If it was ever on a bed, it was on a bed for about 2 minutes and then put away and carefully saved, and beautifully coordinated with the swags and then the flowers of the Carolina lily. So it's really one of the most beautiful examples of its type. And of course, next to it is a wonderful Baltimore album quilt. And I think many people in the room have made or seen album quilts, and you'll know that each block is made individually and possibly by different people. Certainly in Baltimore from the late 1840s to the early 1850s, again, they hit this peak of making these album quilts, and it's like a symphony coming together of applique. There's some painting. There's for those who like to embroider, there's beautiful embroidered edging. Each one is literally like a page in an album, and Katie, you pointed out today, why is the orientation symmetrical? Sort of why are some of the baskets pointing in? Well, if we can think about a bed, those would hang down on the side, and then you'd have the center blocks would be down what's sort of a single bed.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love, as we discussed, that little hunting scene in the middle with the rower below the bridge. Well, of course, as the 19th century moved on, as it progressed, the issue of slavery was really, of course, ripping our country apart, and civil war became inevitable. This piece has a really, seems to really speak to that moment. And could you tell us about what we're looking at in terms of the materials as well as the motifs?
Certainly. Well, you'll notice it's not shiny, so it's made from wool, and it is both depicts the Civil War and is literally of the stuff of the Civil War. The gray stripes were probably the type of cloth that was used for bedrolls for Union soldiers, made in the Schuylkill Armory factory outside of Philadelphia or near Philadelphia. And then the patterned stripes that are between the gray stripes are some regular suiting, wool suiting, those are the black pieces, but the bright red and the bright blue and the plaid were produced for Zouave Union uniforms. And so there were Zouave troops in both the Confederate troops and the Union troops. And they were almost sort of a costume that evoked the Ottoman Empire, or really North Africa and Morocco is what they came from, the Crimean War, and French soldiers would adopt this Moroccan sort of costume. And they had often soldiers wore fezzes, sometimes they had vests, and they often had sort of baggy pantaloons. And they were a favorite subject of Winslow Homer, who loved to draw them at camp. And so the maker of this quilt, we don't know their name. There might have been several people. We are pretty certain from research that it was made for the Sanitary Commission Fair in Philadelphia in 1864. And one of the quilters, one of the artists in the exhibition who made a quilt in 1986, she actually did some research on, she got very excited about this quilt, and she discovered that the block at the top in the center was taken from Harper's Weekly, the June 1863 issue that showed Grant riding into Vicksburg into victory. So. And then you'll see when you get to see it that there's like the foreshortening's a little off, so it has that, again, going back to the democratic art, it's definitely an interpretation of this actually unattributed image. And then below Grant, to the back of his horse, you can see a Zouave uniformed soldier with his fez on, and the block below the flag to the left. I don't know if you can see it, but you'll be able to see it in the gallery. There's an A and a K, AK, and it's appliqued on in black lettering, and then there's red stitching to sort of emphasize that. I think that represents the initials of the name of the company that in Philadelphia that was a sponsor of the Sanitary Commission Fair Adolf and Keen, they made military caps, so they would have made Zouave caps. But again, it's like the Hoosier suffrage quilt. Like so much research goes into sort of peeling back those layers, and the research that we've done, that so many have done before us. We hope that there'll be more research to come and more discoveries about these just really wonderful works of art.
Sure, so reflective of history. Several of the quilts in this section were made during the Civil War. There's a particularly beautiful and poignant one that was made by a mother as her son was going to war. He was in one of the battles in Tennessee, I want to think Chickamauga, maybe. He did live, thankfully. But other objects in this section are more recent, and they really speak to the legacy of slavery that we are still, unfortunately, dealing with today. One of the most powerful works in the show is this one, made by the woman whose quote I began with. Can you tell us about this piece and the maker and her thoughts about the piece?
Well, I had just the great fortune of working with Dr. Carolyn Metz-Lumi, who is an aeronautical engineer, among many things, a mother, a grandmother. And
the founder of a quilt collective?
Yes, the Women of Color Quilters, she is founder of the Women of Color Quilters Collective. I actually did not get that name right, but she founded this in...
it's on the label upstairs.
It is on the label.
You got it right there.
And she founded the group and has done so much research on African American story quilts. She started this in 1984, recognizing that African American women quilters were not getting, their work was just not being shown. And it was important for her, because she was also a quilter, that she was going to lead the way and open the door for Sew Network, the Women of Color Quilters Network. She was going to use this network to open the door to galleries and public spaces, and there's no charge to join. She's just always wanted this to be the most inclusive group that you could possibly imagine, and I'm so glad she did, because it really helped make this exhibition so much richer. We've just been able to connect with so many people who are deeply dedicated quilters, telling stories through quilts. So when I spoke with her about her own work, at a certain point in her career, she switched from making applique quilts in color to designing quilts that would be silk screened, like this one, on a white piece of cloth, and then she quilts the whole piece on a machine, which you'll be able to see the patterns that she makes. And they all tell either a historical story, like this one shows Billie Holiday and performing, and she was most famous for what's often called America's first protest song, Strange Fruit, written by Abel Maripol, and she recorded it in 1939. And in it, of course, you see the lynched figures that are referred to in the song, and the Ku Klux Klan figures at the bottom. And it's a very powerful work of art. And we thought, as we were talking to her and others in the MFA and outside the MFA, that it was very important for all of the works by living artists that we incorporate as much of their own story and their own exploration with the potential viewer. So I hope that when you see this, you'll take the time to listen to the audio guide recording of her speaking about this work.
Yeah, it's really excellent, really powerful. Shifting gears a bit, after the Civil War, as the nation was attempting to recover and to heal, quilts began to be made for places other than the home. Some were being made for walls rather than beds, I think you wrote, which I really loved. Because we are nowhere near where we were supposed to be at this time during our run-through as we practiced this afternoon, I'm just going to really quickly show this work that was made as a souvenir and that was hung in an exhibition hall during the centennial celebration in Philadelphia. And this one, which you know I hate to skip over because I've really fallen in love with this, a work made by a woman who really wanted to be a, quote, fine art artist who, but because of physical disabilities, wasn't able to be a sculptor, but she did see these as sculptures in fabric, and they're really remarkable and incredible, and I love this work with those incredible bats surrounding the cross. It's just so cool. But for the sake of time, I'm going to speed ahead a little bit. We did talk about Gee's Bend in the introduction with the Vote quilt. Even a little closer to home, we have this really beautiful chenille coverlet that is from Dalton, Georgia. And I think we all know that Dalton is the carpet capital of the world, but could you maybe tell us how it got that moniker that we see driving up and down the interstate?
Well, again, we relied on the deep research of many people into these. I think I would say these are probably this is actually a unique American decorative art. Making the chenille bedspreads, it was developed from candle wicking and stuffed work, and it was just a great American story of innovation. That the carpet tufting technology was adapted to a cottage industry to make these incredible chenille bedspreads. And I love that you found the photograph of the peacock dresses. I really want one of those. And we just realized, wow, we couldn't really tell this story. So we acquired this for the publication and exhibition because, we couldn't tell an American bed cover story without a chenille bedspread. And so we have it in the gallery with one of our most beautiful Amish quilts from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, the three quilts from Gee's Bend that you just showed several of, and it's like in this great section of the sort of exploring the myth of the Americanness of quilts. And over again, when we were starting to get into this project, and when I was learning more about quilts, I just kept hearing about, well, it was the drugs, it was the department store bedspread that ended the quilt. And so I love that they're all in the room and they have to face off with each other. Because when you look at them and you see the colors and how they have this wonderful design affinity. So I like to see them not in opposition anymore, but actually in this almost like a sort of a feedback loop of inspiration and reincarnation and return.
It's beautiful. Well, one of the works also in this exhibition that speaks, to a darker moment in our history, but during this time period, is the one made by the children in the internment camp. And it's pretty powerful.
Yes.
Tell us more about it.
Well, I think you'll find when you go into the exhibition that this is a moment when people encounter Dr. Carolyn Matsumi's Strange Fruit. This is a moment when people stop and pause, and because there's so much here with this quilt that was made in the Poston internment camp in Arizona during World War II. You can see the black and white photograph of the classroom. It was made in a 4th grade classroom. Each of the blocks with cross-stitching has the name of one of the students in Masaka Hirohato's classroom, and they were doing a unit on the history of pioneer women. So they had done samplers in cross-stitch, And according to the family history, the children wanted to make a quilt. So one family had enough of this red printed cotton to fill in the blocks that you see, that's the floral print, which, just if we can just pause for a moment and think about the decision to grab that piece of cloth while they're being taken from their homes, and then to give it to this project, this classroom project about American history is, it just makes you stop and think how many challenging times have been met through creative communal efforts like these. And we were talking about today how there aren't as many men in this exhibition, but there were boys who helped make this quilt. And the girls' names are embroidered in red, and the boys' names are embroidered in blue, cross-stitch. So there are just these moments of both sadness and tragedy, but also, I think, because quilts can connect with the individuals who made them, I think that gives us, again, that sort of glimmer of human hope.
And resilience, I think,
resilience,
too.
yes.
Well, the exhibition concludes with what we now know is where it began, with quilts from the 1970s and 80s and even up to almost the present day. Quilts that are made by artists who are really speaking to and responding to important social and political issues, from gun violence to indigenous sovereignty, as we can see in this work by Carla Hemlock. And of course, the exhibition, or this section, features just a star of the show, and one that, before we take some of your questions, we just have to talk about the incredible Bisa Butler quilt and how it's constructed, how you acquired it. Tell us about this great star.
Yes, it was like a star. It was a star that just shot across the sky, and we were like, that's it. And we had no idea when we started the project in 2017 that we'd be on a plane to Newark, New Jersey to go visit Bisa Butler in 2019 to see this quilt, To God in Truth, in her home studio. Before she had quilted it, we found out about her amazing quilts through a local an artist in Boston, she had just had an exhibition at Miami Basel, this incredible art fair, and
which I saw. I mean, I remember seeing her work in 2018. Richard Feaster, are you here? Like we saw it together, and it's so cool.
So this is why you need lots of help, because you can't go to every art fair, you can't be online all the time, and so she was really an emerging artist at that moment, and so we saw this piece. As you know, Boston is a baseball town. We said, this is the one for us, and this project, and it became the cover of the book, and it has been such an amazing journey to get to know Bisa Butler, and she was just so in support of this whole project, and so I like to remind, and there is a wonderful video. So one of the challenges, I think, of being in an art museum and presenting work that you'd like to explain more about the process, I think the video is so perfect because it serves the purpose of illustrating the process, which in a way is a lot like how so many makers of quilts traditionally learned how to do it. It was really by watching and following along, and so her journey from a painter to an art teacher, to exploring quilts on her own, and literally not a drop of paint is used to create this. And the image on the screen, for those of you who haven't seen her work, you'll be amazed. And I find I discover new things in it every time I look.
We said this morning, and I'll say it again now, this is an exhibition that truly must be seen in person, because when I look at this work and the scale, the vibrancy of the colors, the layering, the texture, it's just, you can't get that online. So it's really a remarkable piece. Well, we do want to leave some time for you all to ask questions of Jen. I'm hoping that maybe the organizers, since we got started a little late, they might give us a few more minutes to do that. But do you all have any questions? Yes, go ahead.
Two questions. Did you use the Cape Cod Quilting Association down there as a resource? Because it's a huge group of ladies that quilt from way backward. I just asked the question if she might have used the Cape Cod. I used to live on the Cape, so I know that group very well, and they have a quilt show, and the stuff that they do is tremendous. The other thing that I thought, and it may be in the exhibit, because I haven't seen it, obviously, is that one of the things that I think people need to recognize is the stitching of these quilts and the impact that the stitching makes. And originally, all these were hand-stitched. But now you're doing machine stitching. But even so, the stitching really makes the quilt.
Yes, that actually, you're absolutely right. It's such a great point that the stitching really defines the quilt. And I think that's what, Katie, you responded to with the Bertha Mextroth quilt with the bats. Certainly I think I talked to so many quilt guilds. The other thing, what's interesting, so the quilt show at the MFA opened in October 2021, which was still the pandemic, so we had no programming. We did some wonderful outreach online. We did a YouTube program on the Harriet Powers quilt. We had some teacher workshops that were also virtual, and I got really good at giving a tour with an iPad on a tripod with wheels, and I was like a weatherman. I could point to the quilt behind me on the screen. And because quilters are so connected online, I was totally introduced to social media programming where I could just, someone from PR would show up in my office and set up my own iPhone, and then I could just talk to like thousands of people about the quilts. And so that, and then also if anyone is ever up in Boston and wants to go to an amazing fabric quilt shop, gather here in Somerville, just north of Boston. That's also a hub of people from all over the region, and so I gave a couple talks there too. So we couldn't have done, and I think you'll find it here too, that quilt guilds and quilters are a highly connected network, and they're coming.
I suspect that we have several here tonight, so thank you for being here. Yeah, second row.
This is more just informational than a question, but my husband and I moved here from Washington, D.C. a little over a year ago. And a few years back, the League of Women Voters were very active, as many of us were, in trying to make D.C. the 51st state. And they created a project which was absolutely fascinating about getting women from all over the country to produce small quilts that were part of the cause. Some of them were, about the monuments in DC or the cherry festivals, but anything and everything related to DC. And it was absolutely fascinating that women from all 50 states participated in this. They were going to take it to the Smithsonian, I think, at the end. But it just goes to show how, you give somebody a reason and they'll do it. It was fascinating. Thanks.
Thank you.
The connections between quilting and politics really is fascinating. Did you have a question?
Thank you. Yeah, I just had a question. Because the exhibit is about American quilting, and I know it's obviously gotten to go to now, this is its fourth stop. I was wondering how you chose quilts in terms of kind of regional variety, if there was any focus on that or focus on trying to represent, specific regional variety. I wasn't even sure if you guys had originally planned for it to be a traveling exhibit or not, but yeah.
It's a great question. So I didn't actually say this at the beginning, but it was always envisioned as a collections-based publication and then eventually exhibition. So we had very few loans. Actually, the Poston quilt is a loan from the National Japanese American Historical Society that we thought was very important to address the gaps that we have in the collection. We don't represent Asian American quilters yet very well. And so the regional gaps are a reflection in the Museum of Fine Arts Boston's collection. And I think we do say in the introduction, I think both the book and the exhibition, that really no museum collection and no project could represent all of American history. And but that's the wonderful thing about a project like this, is that because there are so many state-based quilt study efforts and quilt documentation projects, in a sense, this is like opens the door to people discovering those as well. So that's a great question about, because regionalism is so important to understand.
I think you might have touched on this lightly as you went along, but is there anything more you could say about the sort of intergenerational inheritance dimension of all this work, all these production factors, materials, et cetera? What about the families inheriting these things? What do you know about that? Because I think we've lost some of that.
Well, it's really interesting because particularly in the MFA's collection, really before about 2000, the year 2000, the 21st century, we really didn't have deliberately collected quilts. We had quilts that came in with larger family collections of other types of textiles, of clothing, of also like furniture and other departments, silver, other decorative arts, paintings. And so they would say, oh yes, well you should have our wonderful 17th century, early 18th century red silk satin quilt. So in those cases, they really had been preserved and well documented, not necessarily as quilts per se, but as valuable family heirlooms associated with specific people in their families, because New Englanders love to write things about themselves. Very self-aware. And so lots of notes come in with which is great, because those notes become very important as we study them. And so there certainly is a deep intergenerational connection, even if it's not necessarily a quilt maker to the next generation of quilt makers, but just an appreciation of textiles, how they're made, the value of them at the time in which they were made, and how they were cared for. We were talking about how, the survival of these, as Seth said, these very fragile, delicate, beautiful objects depends on an understanding of the past. So if you've seen someone make something, you're going to take better care of it, even if you haven't participated in making it, and of course even more so if you have participated. And so we're pretty much grateful to all of the many hands who helped preserve these for us to see, because actually so little of it really does survive in this condition.
If I could just add, I'm sorry that we so quickly passed over the G's Bend, the second G's Bend quilt, but that certainly is a place where, from what I understand, this intergenerational, a mother teaching her child, and then just where it really is passed down from one generation to the next. Although also each generation kind of adding their own to it and kind of making it a very distinctive work of theirs as well.
And I just love the stories of, like, Carla Hemlock said that her maternal grandmother taught her how to quilt, and her grandmother always had an apron. And in the pocket of the apron were always like little scraps of cloth. And then she'd like pull them out and figure out. And so when she had a moment, she'd just, sew a few together and put them back in the pocket, sew a few together. And then Helen Witherspoon, she grew up in Gee's Bend and was part of the last graduating class of the high school. And from her, we acquired the courthouse steps that's on the banner in the front of the Frist Art Museum entrance, which I'm so proud of. She talked about seeing her grandmother and her great aunts quilting and being a little girl under the quilting frame, and so all of those stories, and you'll find this when you go to the exhibition, that people who don't even think they have a quilt story, like one will just bubble up when they see these, because I think there's something about the nature of quilts and of textiles that make people actually remember something from the past that they might have even forgotten.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more question, if there's one in the audience. Okay.
So following up on the Gee's Bend quilts, we saw the Vote one, which you said was inspired by Martin Luther King's visit. Before you said that, my friend was sure it was an ERA quilt. I looked at the year and said it was a bicentennial quilt. And I'm wondering what led you to conclude it was inspired by MLK's visit?
Well, I think that's something that we did not have the opportunity to ask Irene Williams what exactly inspired her to make the Vote quilt. It was, perhaps I was an overstatement in the sense that, and so it very well could have been an ERA quilt or a bicentennial quilt, because there are Gee's Bend bicentennial quilts. We actually have one in the collection, and certainly is a bicentennial print, and probably an ERA print too. And certainly the act of choosing to use that print was one that we are unable to ask the artist today. And a lot of what we wanted to do with the exhibition was like deep contextualization, to bring people into the history of the context of these, and that bringing in the life experience of the quilter and the artist was part of something for, I think, each quilt that we wanted to explore.
Well, and if I can just add a little bit, I read in the catalog that I thought was so poignant. I think Gee's Bend was particularly negatively impacted by Jim Crow and discrimination when it comes to voting. You all know it's in the bend of a river. It's very isolated, and there was a ferry that that folks could take that would just get them across to the other side to the voting station very quickly. And then in 1962, they stopped that ferry service in hopes of keeping people from voting. Records show that many folks from Gee's Bend, they were not to be deterred, and they would, all cram into a car, and they would make what ended up being, I want to say, like a 2-hour round trip, excursion, so that they could still vote. So I do think that this community was very much thinking about access to voting and fighting against voter suppression. And I don't know the full circumstances, but it does seem to me rather shocking that the ferry service didn't reopen until 2006. So definitely something that was a big part of that community up until very recently. Well, I just want to thank you, Jen, again for being here, you all for coming out.
Thank you, Katie.
We are open tonight until 8:30. somebody would nod that yes, we are open until 8:30 this evening, so you still have almost an hour to check out the exhibition. Of course, it will be up until October 12th, so a nice long run. We hope you come often. Bring your friends, and there's all sorts of other great programs that you'll see on our website, so we hope to see you there. Have a good night.